Let me introduce Brucella Jordan, portraying Anne Spenser. Brucella?
Let me begin by reciting one of my poems, one that I feel makes a specific comment on my life and writing. Turn an earth clod, peel a shaly rock, in fondness molest a curly worm, whose familiar is everywhere. Kneel, and the curly worm, sentient now, will light the word that tells the poet what a poem is. That poem is titled 1975. I, Anne Spenser, am a poet of the Harlem Renaissance era. To clarify my inclusion into what was a world of radical Negro writers, I must say that it had more to do with my being a female Negro writer at that historical moment in time, rather than with the nature of my writing. As you may know, most of the works of the Negro writers of the Harlem Renaissance reflected their displeasure with the violent treatment and social and economic status of colored Americans. Well, I too was aware of that state of affairs of my people, and I worked diligently in many ways to help alleviate it. But those particular themes were rarely reflected in my poetry. My poetry has been described as being private and personal, closely related to romantic or nature poetry, and historically lying somewhere between the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar and Langston Hughes. And I suppose that that is an accurate categorization of my work. I was once asked why there was such a lack of protest poetry in my writing at a time when Negroes had so much to protest about. And I stated in County Cullen's book, Caroling Dusk, that I usually write about the things that I love, but I have no civilized articulation for the things that I hate. So you see, I was not a typical writer of the Harlem Renaissance, but my writing was considered to be interesting among the likes of Langston Hughes, County Cullen, Claude McKay, Georgia Douglas Johnson, and Nella Larson, to name a few. Interesting almost as much for what I did not say as for what I did say. Now, out of all of my writings, I never published a collection of poems, something that most poets look forward to doing. But my poetry has been published in numerous anthologies of poetry and in magazines as well. Allow me to tell you how my publishing career began. It was shortly after World War I, when Negro awareness and protests of lynchings, disfranchisement, and employment problems were at a high, that some of the Negro citizens of Lynchburg, Virginia, where I lived as an adult, were banding together in groups to address those issues on a local level. Well, I spearheaded the group that founded Lynchburg's first chapter of the NAACP. To assist us with our organizational efforts, the national headquarters of the NAACP sent its field secretary to Lynchburg. Being difficult in those days for traveling Negroes to obtain public lodging, it was customary for members of the community to offer those persons a place to stay. Well, my husband, whom I call Pops, and I volunteered to accept the responsibility that time. But little did we know the stature of the individual who was about to visit our home. It turned out to be James Weldon Johnson, an educator, politician, writer, composer even of our Negro national anthem, To Lift Every Voice and Sing. He was traveling the country investigating lynchings and opening chapters of the NAACP. I consider that first meeting with James Weldon Johnson in 1919 to have been one of the most significant events of my life.